I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual. 起立，面向佛堂，参加先鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，参加各位的传习鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。So, Tao Te Ching, chapter 72 is as follows. When people no longer fear force, they bring about greater force. Do not limit their place. Do not reject their livelihood. Because the ruler does not reject them, therefore, they do not reject the ruler. Therefore, the sages know themselves, but do not glorify themselves. Respect themselves, but do not praise themselves. Thus, they discard that and take this. So that's 72. So before we go any further, I want to look at the whole thing overall and point out that in the beginning, it appears to be a commentary for the ruler, for the king or the emperor. So this is Lao Tzu acting in an advisory role to suggest to the king how best to govern. Now, the bottom part of it, starting from line 7, you see that it's actually talking about something that seems very different. It's talking about the behavior of the sages, how the sages are. They know themselves, they do not glorify themselves, they respect themselves, they don't praise themselves, etc. So the challenge in this particular chapter is to be able to link the two, i.e., advice to the emperor, draw a straight line from that to emulating the behavior of the great sages. So what the sages do, we already know, are meant for all Tao cultivators to emulate. So it just means that eventually we get to a point where we want to be like the sages in knowing ourselves, but not glorify ourselves, have self-respect, and yet do not flaunt our own achievements, praise ourselves. So that's all about internal work in self-management, managing your internal mental states and emotional states. Now, we can easily connect between the two. We can connect the dots by realizing that everywhere, no exception, in the Tao Te Ching, whenever Lao Tzu is speaking to the king or the emperor, Lao Tzu is in fact speaking to you and me. Speaking to you as the king or the queen of your private kingdom. Speaking to everyone as the emperor of their private empire. So ultimately, what Lao Tzu wants to do by talking about this advice to the king is to make it the advice for every Tao cultivator. And that links it together with reference to the sages. So the first step in analyzing this chapter is to turn on your Superman, Superwoman X-ray vision to see the hidden structure of a particular chapter. And we can do that by examining the Chinese characters visually, even without knowing Chinese. So scanning the Chinese characters up and down, we see some repeated characters from one line to the next. So I've highlighted them for you. You can tell from line 3 to line 4, we've got 3 characters in common in the same position, same characters in the same position. So that results in a translation that's structurally similar in the English from 3 to 4. Then from 5 to 6, you notice that there's a couple of characters that are the same, that are repeated. Then we have line 7, which is about the sages, and then below we've got more repetitions between 8 and 9. So that's it for the character repetitions, and taking a look at the sense or the meaning of this particular chapter, we find one pretty quick and easy way to divide up the chapter. So think about how everything from line 7 downward is about the sages, that they know themselves, they do not glorify themselves, they respect themselves, they do not praise themselves, they discard that and take this. So it would make sense for us to have a line there to denote that everything down here is like one concept about how the sages are. Of course, at this point, you may be wondering, well, the very last line, what does it mean that they discard that and take this? What is that and what is this? And how come you translate it in this particular way? Well, it's because this is how the original Chinese actually reads. The very last line literally says, thus they discard that and take this. So the 5 characters, if you were to do them verbatim, literally, one by one, it would be thus discard that, take this. And then you add in some connecting words to make it sound better in English, you end up with this exact translation. Now, the meaning of the line is not in question because of the wealth of commentaries that we have, and also because we can guess quite easily when we understand the meaning of the chapter. So I'll get to that as the very last thing that we analyze. We want to work our way down from the top to the bottom, as usual. So what about other divisions up here? Well, yes, if we take a look at the different structures from line 1 to 6, we can quickly see, well, these 6 lines are actually divided into 3 sets of 2 lines each, 3 couplets. So if we want to be really meticulous, we could actually show that. We could say that, well, you know, the first 2 lines, they are similar, and you notice that these lines that the red lines that I put up in the top section are thin lines because it's more like a subdivision. So the top 2 lines about, you know, people no longer fearing force and therefore bring about greater force. We'll talk about exactly what that means in just a moment. And then line 3 and 4, do not do this, do not do that. This is suggesting, advising the king or the ruler or the emperor, hey, you know, don't take away the freedom that people have. So these 2 are together for sure. And then lines 5 and 6, the ruler does not reject them. They do not reject the ruler. This is just another way to say that there is peace and harmony that exists in the kingdom due to the amount of freedom that the people enjoy, due to the trust that the ruler has for the subjects, and therefore the subjects in turn also have trust for the ruler. There's mutual respect and there's mutual love. So yeah, we can definitely see the divisions there. Another way to look at this is just to simplify and say that while recognizing the couplets are in place, we can roughly divide up 72 into 2 parts only, and that's the top part, 6 lines, is about the people. Or if you want to be very technical and very precise, very exact, you might want to say that, well, the top part is about the relationship between the ruler and the subjects. The bottom part is about the sages. Okay, so both ways of looking at the chapter, I feel, are quite valid. You can divide it up like this, or just divide it up like this. Either way, it's whichever way you prefer, whichever way makes more sense to you. Now that we have done that, it's time to dive into the chapter line by line, character by character. Remember, we want to draw a line between advice to the king, advice to the emperor. Up here, the relationship between the ruler and the subjects, to the sages, how they are. So let's start by focusing on this one character here, Wei. So what Wei means in Mandarin is might or mighty, power, powerful, force, forceful. So literally the first line says, mean the people, bu, not, or no. Wei means fear. So they no longer fear this, no longer fear the might of the empire, of the government. When they no longer fear it, well, what does that mean? Now remember, everything that we take a look at in the first section of 72 has to be looked at in multiple layers, multiple perspectives. Therefore, for the analysis, I will always present it in three parts. In part one, it's about the perspective of Lao Tzu as the advisor to the king. So when people no longer fear force, well, what force is that? This is referring to the oppressive force that the ruler brings to bear on the subjects. You can do that through excessive taxes, law enforcement, bureaucracy, and so on. Now, so what about the other perspectives? What about perspectives other than that of the king? Well, we can think about your own private kingdom as your world. In your world, there's you, and then there's people that you interact with. So that's the level of social interaction. So you are at the center of this world, this circle of friends, circle of people that all know you, relatives, family members. So at the center of that little universe, you'll interact with people in a certain way, and you'll react to people who act a certain way towards you. And that means in those social interactions, you could sometimes be tempted to be a domineering bully, and you force people to try to bend them to your will. That's one possibility. Another possibility in social interactions, whether it's among friends or perhaps in the workplace, is that you could observe people being bullied. Not you specifically, or sometimes it is you who is being bullied, that someone else is the bully, and they apply the bullying, domineering force upon you or upon another person. So in social interactions, that force is referring to this right here. The domineering force bullies use to get their way. My way or the highway type of situation. So that's two different perspectives. Now, the perspective of the emperor and the perspective of you living in society. Now, there's yet another perspective, the most important one in Tao cultivation, and that's you internally. That's you ruling the empire of your mind. That is, you have to be able to manage your various thoughts as your subjects, your ideas, your desires, your wants and needs. We're going to get to that in just a moment. So managing your emotional states is ruling your internal kingdom. And so the oppression that the king uses on a bunch of subjects, denying them their livelihood, for instance, that will be the equivalent to you as a ruler denying yourself of a genuine need that you have. This is going to get us into a discussion of wants versus needs, desires versus requirements. So we'll get to that in just a moment. But now you see the distinction between the three different levels. And they're not the same at all. They're distinct from one another. We can talk about them separately. Sometimes they can bleed into one another in 2 and 3. Sometimes your experience in social interactions or at the workplace can affect your internal state. And the other way, it's just as valid. If you are unable to control your emotions, you are at a very severe disadvantage in social interactions or at the workplace, because you can go off, you can be triggered, you can hit the ceiling, You can fly off the handle, and you can give someone else a tongue lashing, and that later on that causes negative repercussions. So they are related, but they are different. So let's keep going. Off to a pretty good start. So let's take a look at this entire line when people no longer fear force. So how do we use the three perspectives to apply to that? So bottom line, there's a natural limit to what people will tolerate. So what that means is that there's a historical pattern that we see over and over again. When you study history, whether it's Asian history, Chinese history, Western history, history of the world, there's a pattern that is recurring. You see it over and over again, and that is the oppressor, the dictator, the bully, well, just keep pushing the envelope, well, keep trying to get away with more and more and more, keep continuing with the domineering force, and at some point, the people have been pushed too far. And that's because the ruler or the bully doesn't know when to stop, by pushing people around. Oh, I have succeeded in doing that. Okay, I'm going to do it some more. I'm going to see where I can push them to the breaking point. And then you discover the breaking point is when the other party explodes. So let's take a look at the three different perspectives on that. So for the emperor or the king, well, the oppression of the people has become greater than the natural fear from the people of negative consequences. Like, I'm going to round people up. I'm going to put them in jail. I'm going to punish them somehow, some way. The beating, by the soldiers to the general population will continue until morale improves. So at some point, the discomfort, the suffering of the people has now far outweighed the fear of negative consequences, and therefore they take action. But before we get to the part about taking action, let's examine the other two perspectives. Remember what they are. There's a social interaction, and then there's also the management of your internal state. So in a simple equivalence, you can see that the bullied, those who are bullied, whether it's you or someone else, can't take any more of the bullying. You have to fight back. You have to, you are sick and tired of it. You're not going to accept any more of it, and therefore you take action, like the people taking action. So what about internally? This one is a little trickier. What happens internally as you're managing your private kingdom and you're suppressing a genuine need that you have? What happens? Well, here's what happens. When you suppress anything too much, you achieve the opposite effect. That is, you deny yourself of a genuine need that you have. You stop yourself from pursuing that, and the more you do it, the more there's a counteracting. There's a force that pushes back against you until one day your need can no longer be denied. You must fulfill that need that you have. So that's the internal perspective. And I think you see how this chapter is going to go. We're going to go through the first part of it, examining all three perspectives one by one, just to make sure that we have total clarity on exactly what it was talking about. And you will see how well this fits with the second half of 72. So there is an expression in Mandarin that I would like to go over with everyone. You can see here in the pinyin, the actual Mandarin pronunciation is 物极必反. 物极必反. This is a very common expression. It's used in everyday conversation all the time, and it's widely applicable to every walk of life, to every aspect of life. So let's take a look at these four characters one by one, see what they are. First character means things. It could be things, singular. And then ji, this is the same character as you find in Tai Chi. It means boundary or extent or the extreme. So we'll just take extreme. B, the third character, means must, absolutely must. And then fan means to turn around, means to reverse course. So 物极必反, a straightforward verbatim translation would be things extreme must reverse. Huh? Okay, well, we can add a few words to it to make it take on clearer meaning in English. When something becomes extreme, it must reverse direction. So as I mentioned, this is widely applicable to every aspect of life. So one way to think of it is that when you've hit rock bottom, there's nowhere to go but up. What that means is that you're suffering some misfortune, some setbacks, and then you realize that, well, things cannot get any worse than they are right now, and therefore, just around the corner, I can look forward to things getting better. By the same token, the opposite is true. When you are at the top of the world, when you are so full of yourself, so exhilarated, so happy, another expression similar to this one in Mandarin is 乐极生悲. It means that when happiness reaches an extreme, it gives rise to sadness. And what that actually is applied to in real life is that, I'm on top of the world, I've achieved everything I wanted, I am thumping my chest, I am mighty, I am great, I am so happy with myself, and that's actually the seed of arrogance that will lead to my downfall, which will lead to my sadness later on. Or I am so happy with the situation, I'm not watching where I'm going, so I trip and fall, and I cause a big swelling bruise that's very painful. 乐极生悲. So many different situations in life, when something reaches a particular extreme, it reverses. It begins to develop in the opposite direction. So etymology, where does this expression come from? Well, it comes from the Tao. And this is because, starting with the ancient sages, looking at the cycles in nature, about how things are constantly changing into one and then coming back into the other and then coming back again. So the easiest example, the most obvious example of all would be day turns into night, turns into day. So in the middle of the day, the sun is at the hottest, and then it begins to get into the afternoon, and eventually sunset, and then you have the evening, and so on. And in a larger pattern, the ancients have also observed that, hey, the full moon is out tonight, and just by seeing the full moon and by basing your anticipation on past experience, that it's going to start to wane, to crescent, to new moon. And new moon, even though you can't really see the moon that well, that it's going to start getting bigger and bigger until you get to the full moon again. So it's the cycle repeating itself. 物极必反. So in ancient times, when the Tao sages looked at heaven and saw these patterns, they leaped to the intuitive insights that whatever they see up above is also applicable to everyday life for human beings. So in this case, it just means that everything in human affairs, the way that you interact with other people, the way that you do your work, when you reach a certain extreme, you work too much, now you have to reverse course. Now you have to get some rest. And when you have rest enough, you got to get back to work. Otherwise, you go stir crazy, etc. So every area of life, this applies. 物极必反. So I'd like you to think about how this applies to every aspect of your life as well. Now, let's go back to the Tao Te Ching and see what Lao Tzu says about this whole idea. 物极必反. So when people no longer feel force, they bring about greater force. They bring about greater force to the ruler. Okay, so what does that mean? So here I am rephrasing what you saw in the previous slide. That which reaches an extreme must reverse course. Okay, so I want to invite you to mentally picture the swing of a pendulum, like a grandfather clock. Pendulum is swinging back and forth. When it reaches an extreme, it comes back. And then I'm going to say that once you have that image in your mind, that's a very Tao-like image because it's continuing that swing back and forth, that cycle. But there's an even better metaphor or mental image that I can ask you to visualize. That's very applicable to this particular chapter. Think of the destructive power of the wrecking ball. So it's like a pendulum, except that it's a really big, heavy weight, and it swings back. It's aimed at a building for demolishing that building. And when it finally comes back and hits that wall, it just breaks everything apart. It actually absolutely destroys that building. So that power, that force, is what I'd like you to think about when you contemplate line 2. They bring about greater force. When you push them as far as you can, then they can't take any more. They come back, bring about greater force, like the destructive power of the wrecking ball. And they demolish the empire or the kingdom. It's an uprising. It's a rebellion that can bring down the empire, the wrecking ball. That's what that means. So that's what it looks like from the ruler's perspective. So remember, there's a couple other perspectives that we also need to look at and think about for total clarity. So first, this is all about the pushback. This is all about you pushing back or somebody else pushing back against the force, and blowback is this is more used in politics, that if a country, let's just say the US, has meddled or has interfered in the affairs of another country, at some point there's blowback, which means a negative consequence that's brought about because of the actions, maybe not in the present moment, but perhaps in a previous administration. So that's actually quite common. The United States has suffered the blowback effect quite a few times in history. So and that's the international scale, but let's stick to the kingdom or the empire. For ruling the kingdom, the sages, because they know about the blowback effect, the pushback effect, they advocate to the ruler, the king or the emperor or the queen, they advocate minimal interference with the people. Like you want to function like a government, there are things that you must do. You have to build roads, you have to build bridges, you need to have the infrastructure in place. You offer extend protection to the people, but at the same time you also collect taxes. So some of those basics you have to maintain. But other than that, the sages would say, interfere with the people's livelihood as little as you possibly can. Give them greater say, greater freedom of movement, greater mobility to do as they wish, to conduct their lives the way they see fit. So that's the minimal interference with the people. So what about interpersonal relationships, or in the social setting? For social interactions, the sages extend courtesy to all to foster positive relations. So that is, a sage would treat people with kindness, would give people plenty of slack. Now remember, the sages are hard on themselves, they're disciplined on themselves, but they are easygoing when it comes to other people. Other people can do what they want. They have the freedom. Of course, sages recognize that people don't have the freedom to impose on you, to cause a problem for you. They don't have the freedom to run into a crowded theater and yell fire when there's no actual fire. They don't have that particular freedom to cause inconvenience or harm or negative results to other people. But aside from that, as long as they are considerate, as long as they are thoughtful, minimally thoughtful to get along in a civilized setting, the sages will extend every courtesy to them or be courteous to all, regardless of their background, regardless of what they look like, perhaps beautiful, not so beautiful, somewhere in between. No matter who it is, they all enjoy the courtesy extended by the sages to foster relations. So what about the internal perspective? What about when you are ruling your internal kingdom, your mental, your mind states, your emotions? Okay, here it is. For internal management, the sages make sure they know the difference between wants and needs. So what are you suppressing? Is it a desire? Is it a genuine need? So if it is only a want and not a need, then the thing to do is to not suppress, but to let go. And you recognize the difference between the two in the consequence of the action that you take. If you were to suppress a need, you end up with a very negative result. You will be unhappy. But if you let go of a desire, it actually leads to joy, the joy of simplifying your life, the joy of traveling more lightly. So this last part is really important. So I've decided to devote multiple slides on it. So we get to know the difference between that that which I want and that which I need. So wants and needs, wants versus needs. Let's make sure we're clear on the distinction between the two. What is a want? Well, it could be material acquisitions, and oftentimes a want is a thing, a material object. And second bullet point, a want is a nice to have rather than a must have. The second bullet can be a point of confusion for many people because there are times when you might say, what a beautiful pair of shoes. Oh, several $100s, but that's a must have. Right? I must have it. You are confusing the must have to a nice to have. So another way to tell that it's a want and instead of a need is that letting them go simplifies life, that you reduce complexity of your life. And there's a joy in discarding the clutter. Great, I have less now. There's less weighing on my mind. So that is what wants look like. What about needs? And by the way, we're going to do some examples. So just to make sure that it's absolutely clear, let's talk about needs. The bare necessities of life. Okay, well, you need to survive. You need to have the bare necessities of life. It's not much. It's not a huge amount that you're going to need beyond what you need to survive, but those are genuine needs, no doubt about it. Now, beyond the physical needs of survival, we also have mental and emotional needs. In terms of mental needs, you need to learn. You need to learn about new things. You need to learn how better to live. Whenever you expand your mind by learning new things, it never goes back to the previous, more limited dimension, and you feel happy for having learned something new. That's a very genuine mental need to learn. Now, there's also a genuine emotional need that we all have beyond the physical needs and the mental needs. The emotional needs will be the connections that we have with one another, friendships that you create, fellowship with people who understand the way you think, people who are kindred spirits, who think along the same mental wavelengths as you do, so they get it. When you talk about something, when you talk about life, when you talk about destiny and spirituality, they get it. They know what you're talking about. They've been thinking about the same thoughts. So that's a very genuine, very legitimate need that you have, fellowship. So suppressing your needs can cause huge problems. These needs, when we talk about the bare necessities of life, suppressing your needs for that is going to call your survival, your personal survival into question. If you are not looking after yourself, if you are not eating properly, getting sufficient rest, getting getting the activities that you require, well, your health is going to deteriorate. So that's going to cause a big problem for you. In a similar way, when you deny yourself of your mental needs to learn something new, to learn to do things better, to be better, well, you're going to start causing problems for yourself as well. And if you deny yourself of your genuine emotional need for connection with other people, oh yeah, that's going to cause problems. So you're gonna have all kinds of issues. Many hours with a therapist. So I want to also introduce a couple of terms in Mandarin that can be sort of a shorthand in what we're talking about here. So wants and needs. A want in Mandarin, 想要. Here's the pinyin. So 想要. Remember, the X is actually SH. 想要 is something that you want to get, that you want to have. As opposed to 需要. 需要 means need. That's all it means. Here's the pinyin. And again, it's the same. The X is actually SH. So it's 需要, 想要, and 需要. So what is the difference between the two? We're going to take a look at 想要 as opposed to 需要. And we'll go through some examples to illustrate the difference between the two. Now, the examples are not meant to be all-inclusive. They're just a few examples to get you going on your own thoughts as to what your 想要 and your 需要 happen to be. And it may be different for you than it would be for someone else. Okay, so I've got a table here. 想要 to the left, what you thought you wanted. 需要 on the right hand side, what you actually need. So this is like that song from Rolling Stones. Does anyone know the song that I'm talking about? Let me check with the people online. You can't always get what you want, but you might find some time that you get what you need. Okay, so let's go through some examples. Okay, 想要. Wow, a mansion would be nice, a huge mansion, you know, with servants, with my own chef. 想要, 需要. Well, not much. Home sweet home. What does that mean, home sweet home? Well, it's a setting where I can feel comfortable, where I can really relax. It doesn't have to be big, and I don't actually need servants in there. So 想要 could be servants. What you actually need is independence to do things your way, to be able to clean up after yourself. You don't need anyone else. Then you realize after a while that 想要, you thought you wanted all the servants, would actually just add to the complexity of your life. And you have to be self-conscious that, wow, I don't, can't just do anything I want. I have to remember if there are going to servants that are walking on me any moment, then I'm not as free as I otherwise could be. So 想要 需要. Of course, there's always going to be people who ask, well, what if my home sweet home is my mansion? Well, good for you. But that's but I think you see the point. The point is that they're not necessarily the same thing. There could be a much bigger mansion that's a 想要, what you thought you wanted, but what you actually need is something that's a lot smaller, much more modest, but it's exactly what you need. place where you can feel safe, place where you can feel warm and relaxed. Okay, let's do another one. Sports cars, high-end vehicles. And I'm putting high-end vehicles because there are plenty of cars out there nowadays, luxury vehicles that cost, millions of dollars, but they're not classified as sports cars. So this is what I thought I wanted, as a teenager. Wouldn't it be nice? So I collect all these pictures of sports cars. Yeah, I would look good in that. I would look good driving this. That's 想要 what I thought I wanted. 需要 what you actually need. Well, I'm putting in here reliable transportation. What I mean by that is that ultimately what I want, what I really need, not want, what I really need in life is transportation that will get me from point A to point B on time, every time. If I could have that, well, that's really what I wanted for. That's really what I wanted the sports car for. But ironically, when I have a sports car, it may be high maintenance. It may be breaking down frequently. And every time I take it in to the shop for repairs, to the garage for repairs, I may be looking at thousands of dollars of expense just to maintain this thing that I thought I wanted, but not actually what I need. So starting in the 80s, Japanese car manufacturers have become phenomenally successful by catering to the right-hand side, providing reliable transportation. So the vehicles, the cars they sold in the United States were known to be far more reliable, more trustworthy, higher quality than their American counterparts, than their American competitors. Now, that's how they achieved the success of Japan Inc. Today, the picture is more muddled. You could have an American manufacturer that's making or manufacturing its cars overseas in a Japanese auto plant, and vice versa. But hopefully, you see the distinction between the two. They're absolutely not the same. If you end up with a sports car that happens to be reliable transportation, good for you. But I hope you see the difference between the two. Let's do another one. Endless buffet. All that food, I can have as much as I want. Wow. Okay, well, that's what I thought I wanted. What I actually need, delicious, healthy nutrition. Sustenance for the body. So, I have to admit this to everyone. I have to confess. I used to be a huge fan of the endless buffet. I would go to every buffet restaurant that within like a 20-mile radius. I would visit all of them, not at the same time, on different days. And every single time the result will be the same. I would come home feeling stuffed, very uncomfortable, and I would have to loosen my belt. I would have to lie down, and that's when my wife says, "You look like Homer Simpson," which is not meant to be a flattering remark. So that's what I thought I wanted. I did not realize at the time that what I needed was delicious, healthy nutrition. That's the direction that my life for now, where hopefully every meal that I have, or more and more of the meals that I have, will be that. So when I'm done having that food, I actually feel great. I actually feel not stuffed, not uncomfortable, but actually feel energetic, feel light on my feet. And I know that it contributes to better health. So, once upon a time, I had really, really high blood pressure, high cholesterol levels, basically a lot of fat throughout my body, and that was all from what I thought I wanted. It wasn't from what I actually need. So there's a point when I realized that what I thought I wanted is actually not a nice to have. Like, what I mean is, endless buffet, well, if I think about the result that I get at the end of it, how I feel, it's not so nice. And sports cars, what if they break down? Used to be that Jaguars were very unreliable, even though they look fantastic. And what if I break down in the middle that my way important things tend to a lot of trouble, a lot of not so nice, illusory. Okay, so let's just look at a few more. So maybe not everybody, but I know certainly some people want fame or the adulation of millions. So this perhaps is appropriate here in Southern California. Are basically the so there's any trying to attain what one, which is fame or the adulation of millions. I'm here to say that no, what you want is not the adulation understanding from true friends. That's better than the adulation of however many fans you may get, fans that fill out an entire stadium. That doesn't mean anything compared to real understanding of true friends. Okay, so I think you begin to see the pattern, the difference between 想要 and 需要. Now, just one last one. This one requires some explanation. 名牌. Okay, well, what is that? Okay, so if you were to type in 名牌, the pinyin 名牌, if you were to type that into translation engine, you may get a very unreliable translation. The one that I got when I checked was name tag. Actually, 名牌 is not name tag. 名牌 means a luxury brand. Like a Louis Vuitton, like a Jimmy Choo. Things that are extremely costly. You know, that handbag that costs several hundred or several $1,000s. You know, the shoes, the belts, the accessories, the dress, the outfit, 名牌. This is 名牌. I put the Chinese there because this is something for which Chinese people are especially susceptible. People sometimes become incredibly obsessed with 名牌, that they want to, you know, what they carry, the handbag, you know, the watch, the jewelry, the bracelets, the necklace, everything top to bottom has to be 名牌. So it doesn't really improve their character. I mean, that may come as a shock, but it's true. 名牌 doesn't contribute to the quality of a person's inner life or that person's personality, the characteristics that other people perceive. It doesn't make them more classy. It does not do anything to make them more elegant. Nonetheless, people go out of their way to shop for 名牌, the luxury brands, and they end up with all these things that one day when they have to depart, they become just leftover items for other people, perhaps as for thrift shops to be given away, possibly even thrown away, even though they were so expensive at the time that they were bought. So for these people, what they think they wanted was 名牌, but what they actually need are things that are practical, useful, lasting. So those are the things that stay with you. Those are the things that actually get utilized more. So not so bad in the computer world, but I have definitely seen people obsess over high-end, top-of-the-line goods. It used to be, 10, 20 years ago, it used to be that the smaller, the more portable that you can make a computer, that you can make a laptop, the more expensive it was. So and I did have people who were obsessed about buying the most expensive gear, computing gear they could. And one day, a friend finally bought one, and so he was so happy about it. He babied it, and he never brought it out. He never actually used it. When I asked him about that new acquisition that he had, hey, how come you're not bringing it out with you? That's a laptop. It's perfect for mobility. It's so ultra portable. And he said, well, it's too expensive. I can't risk losing it or damaging it, so I leave it at home. But you bought it because it's portable, and no, you're not actually using it. That doesn't make any sense. So there's a difference between 想要 what you thought you wanted, and 需要 what you actually need. Okay, so let's get back to the Tao Te Ching. We're now on to line 3. Line 3 and line 4, remember, the commonality between the two is do not this and do not that. This is this appears on the surface to be advice to the king from Lao Tzu. So let's take a look at line 3. Do not limit their place. So sages, even in ancient times, living under emperors and this system of monarchy with divine rights of kings, sages always had a preference for freedom, not just for themselves, but also for the people around them. They prefer to give other people the freedom that they deserve, and they themselves prefer to have freedom in their own choice of actions, their own choice of thoughts. So, how do we apply to the 3 different perspectives, starting with the king? They would advise the king to refrain from restricting people's movements where they can and cannot be. In other words, just leave people alone. Let them do what they want. Interference doesn't really contribute to the king's own well-being. Interference usually is just a illusion of control. So I want to quickly check. About 6 minutes ago, we had some audio breakup. I want to check with everyone again if everyone is able to hear me okay. Okay, so occasionally, this still happens to Facebook sometimes, that for a few minutes, audio is going to break up. It's not a problem on our end. It seems to be a problem on the Facebook side. So let's just continue. Now we sound okay. If you guys missed the explanation for a particular slide, I can go back to that next time, next meeting, and redo that particular slide. For now, we can keep moving. Okay, so at that level, Lao Tzu, sages would advise the king to refrain from restricting people with a lot of bureaucratic rules and regulations. What about social interactions? So sages would refrain in social activities, in social settings. The sages will refrain from imposing burdensome, unreasonable rules on other people, what they can and cannot do, what they can or cannot say. When they try to do that, there's the blowback effect, there's the pushback effect. Now, we see that in our world, we see that in our society, when people push back against political correctness. Why can I not call it what it is? Why can I use certain terms? Are you forcing me to be politically correct? Now, the pushback will sometimes go too far the other way, losing sight of the fact that the original intention behind politically correct terms was actually a positive intention. It was actually a way to reach out to be more inclusive of people and to make sure that their feelings are taken into account and not just the feelings of the privileged few. Okay, so what about the internal perspective? Well, the sages would choose to not limit their own thoughts. There are no forbidden thoughts. They wish to transcend dogma, what you can or cannot think about, what is right, what is wrong. The sages would prefer to decide that for themselves. Okay, let's, the time is now 12:24, and that means we should be looking at summing everything up for the day. I think I'll show one more slide, and then we can push on to the summary. Okay, so yeah, it's a good thing for us to end on line 4 because line 3 and line 4 are together, so it's better to talk about them together. And there's a lot to talk about in line 4, so I can like do an introduction, and then later on we can talk about it in greater detail. So line 4 says, do not reject their livelihood. So this one actually requires some explanation. It may not seem immediately, intuitively clear what it means to reject the livelihood of the people. What it really means is that the ruler has no appreciation or understanding of how everyday people live, how they scratch out a living. So the most common example, perhaps, is the expression, let them eat cake. Let them eat cake is often misattributed to Marie Antoinette, the last queen of France, before her head was cut off. I don't think she made it to the age of 40. She was 30-something when she was when it was off of her head by the rebels, by the people who instigated the French Revolution. And this is more than 2 centuries ago. This is 223, 224 years ago that she lost her head, literally speaking. But what is that expression, let them eat cake? Well, supposedly, and this is not what she actually said, but she supposedly said that the peasants who are starving, who have no bread whatsoever, she was allegedly reacting in a very careless way to say, oh, no bread, that's not a problem, just let them eat cake. So it's infuriating, and it shows how little, how tenuous of a connection she has with the population, with the French people. Now, in reality and actual history, Marie Antoinette was actually an intelligent and sensitive as a princess, and even though her lifestyle was lavish, she actually contributed greatly, much more so than her peers, to charity. So she was not someone who would say that. So it was actually not an expression said by her, but by someone else. And I'll talk about the real etymology of that next time. But the idea is that the wealthy and powerful can sometimes lose touch with basic reality, which means rejecting the livelihood of the people, having no appreciation or understanding of how everyday people live. So I'm going to leave you with that idea. Next time I will go into it in much greater detail. For now, though, I want to push on to the summary for today. So let me jump ahead to where that is at. So the spiritual path of Wiguan Dao is open to all. Be sure to let us know if you feel that it's right for you. I will do everything I can to help you seek and receive the Tao. Exercise for this chapter is mostly things to think about. First, you'll recall me talking about that which reaches an extreme must reverse course. So my question for you is that how would you apply this idea from 72 to your social interactions? Are you acting in ways that veer or approach the extreme? Are there other people that tend to be extreme in their behavior? in social interactions, how would you apply this idea? And wants versus needs. So think about 想要 versus 需要. Take a moment to reflect on about your own nice to haves and your must haves. And more importantly, reflect on your journey so far. So what, if any, are the items that have transitioned from one to the other? What I mean by that is that there are things that you used to feel are must-haves, but now have transitioned to a nice-to-have. What are those things? I'd like to invite you to think about that. And lastly, with wants versus needs and 物极必反, I would like to invite you to apply these concepts to your internal cultivation. That really is the most important thing, and it will set you up to perfect understanding of the second half of 72. Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持架3鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，3鞠躬，持架规则是1鞠躬，接班一鞠躬。Okay, everybody, we are done.